Hello, welcome to part 3. I'm just going to dive right back in, okay? We just finished talking about how you need to play the part. The audience wants you to be confident. They want you to be strong. And that doesn't, by the way, mean that if you're introverted and you don't feel comfortable in front of people, that you can't still be yourself. I'm not asking you to be someone fake, okay? I'm asking you to be a bigger version of who you really are. Does that make sense? It's not. I mean, I guess some people it's easier to put on a whole different persona when they're in front of a group of people, and if that's you, go ahead, do that. Be that person if that works. But for most of my students over the course of my career, I find that it's like whatever volume you operate at normally, turn it up a few decibels. Okay, whatever you normally do, whoever you normally are, just turn that up a little bit. If you're someone who's kind of dry and has that sense of humor, stay dry. Stay dry. Just turn it up a little bit. Makes sense. I'm not telling you that if you're someone who likes to be up and energetic that you have to change, or if you're sort of have a dry sense of humor. No, have the dry sense of humor. Just turn it up a little bit. Okay? So play the part. You're the star. Next, he talks about how important it is to know what happens next. Now, you should already have some of this going on because you're using the template, okay? You should be demonstrating that you know what's happening next because you're going to tell us in the preview, and you're doing your transitions, you're doing your internal summaries. This stuff should be in there already. But to say it a different way, it's really important to set up what's coming next. You as the speaker, you as the presenter, know what's coming next, and so what you're saying now should set up what's coming in the future. Okay, this is a really good way to say it. Okay, I can summon the room's attention at the right time to make sure they are all looking at or listening to me when the next thing I'm going to say is funny, important, or powerful. You set that up. You have that power. You are in control in that way. Okay. So what I'm saying right now should set up the thing that I'm about to show you, the thing that I'm about to say, whatever's going to happen. If I'm using a piece of information right now, I shouldn't just be throwing out information and going, and here's this piece of information, moving on. No, I should say, look, here's this piece of information. This piece of information is significant because when we get to this next thing, you're going to understand why it fits, okay? So use what you're saying in the present to set up the future, okay? Knowing what's coming next is extremely important. And most of my students they don't think this way. They're thinking, say it and get done. Like, that's it. Say this, say the information, cite it correctly, so don't get in trouble for plagiarism, and then move to the end of the presentation. But use yourself to live in the moment so that what you're saying sets up what's happening next. Okay? Now, Brandon, how do I do this? Do I write it? What do I do? Yeah, you write it, but you have to practice it. All right? He says in his, Scott Berkun says in the chapter that he sometimes will delete a really great idea or something really cool from a presentation simply because he can't figure out how to transition to it this way. That is excellent advice. Your audience needs to be able to, this goes back to setting the pace. This goes back to playing the part. You have set up the pace. You kind of know what's happening in the speech. Make sure that you are practicing setting up what's coming next. Okay? That is how you become a great speaker. All right? And it's how you keep your audience's attention for a lot longer than a few seconds. All right? So, we've hit all that. Now, here we come to one of the most amazing and difficult pieces of what he's saying. He brings up tension and release. Okay, now tension and release is going to be present in the music you enjoy. It's going to be present in the movies you like. It's going to be present in the books you like to read. It's going to be present in the TV shows, even the silly, stupid, nonsensical things that you like to watch. If you like to watch silly shows, the tension is between the thing that's funny, and then if it's not funny, you're just waiting for the next thing. Okay? In all cases, tension is created by the suggestion of releasing it. So you can find some way to incorporate tension and release in what you're doing. Sometimes it's through telling a story where you set up some drama. He says introduce drama, right? Introduce some drama or introduce something funny and an explanation. So it can be a story where you don't tell us the ending. You can begin with a story in the attention getter and you don't tell us the ending until later in the speech. We're waiting for that to resolve. Sometimes it's in each individual point. You can create tension and release in lots of different ways. He gives you some ways. He says problem, solution, and premise, and then I'm adding delivery in there, okay? He says problem, solution is a really great structure, and it is. It's a really great structure. We talked a little bit about this last week with organizational structures. Problem, solution is a really good way. Here's a problem. What are we going to do? That's a really good, sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm just going to ignore this, okay? Problem, solution is a really good way. This is a problem. What are we going to do? I have some ideas, okay? That is a really good way to do tension and release. He talks about premise in a really cool way. He says that the premise of your presentation can establish that tension, and then you just release it by the delivery of it. And so I believe his example is why no one should go to school. Well, I'm interested in that presentation. He doesn't say anything else about it in the chapter. He just leaves us in tension, but that's okay. The premise of your presentation can establish that tension and release as well. Another thing that a lot of my students don't think about is the delivery. You can do tension and release in your delivery. Think about the really great songs that you listen to. The really great songs that you listen to are going to have different levels, okay? And even if it's a really low-key sort of song, it's the great ones anyways, they have this little bit of tension to it. And at some point it's going to release with either a step down to something even less, or it's going to go up to something even bigger, okay? The music's going to swell, something's going to happen, or the bottom's going to drop out of it. And you're just sort of left floating there for a minute, okay, before it comes back in. You can do that in your delivery. You can do that. You can speed up at very specific moments to make sure that the tension sort of picks up a little bit. You can get a little more intense in your tone. You can increase your volume. You can drop your volume to draw your audience in if it's a really important point. So you can actually use your delivery as a tool to create tension and release. It's a really cool way to do it, okay? We'll talk more about delivery later in our semester. Right now, we're working on getting ourselves used to speaking. We're getting ourselves used to organizing a presentation, the preparation process, the practicing process. And so to really hone on delivery, we kind of have to have all that other stuff in place first, all right? So tension and release, and then we get to actually getting the audience involved. These are things that my students try to do. Some students will just sort of intuitively think, oh, you know what? If I'm going to have their attention, I need to have them doing stuff. So my words here are thoughtfully involve the audience. And I'm very serious about this thoughtfully thing. Do not do this as a default way of keeping audience attention. It's not always appropriate. It's not always relevant. If I'm in a business meeting and I'm doing a presentation for my bosses and my boss's bosses, you know, maybe I just really need to stick to whatever the context requires. Or maybe that is the situation to be like, hey, have you ever struggled with this? And to see your bosses all raise their hand, that's going to create connection between them, connection with you. Really thoughtfully think it through is what I'm saying here, okay? Just because sometimes asking, sometimes here are the things, okay? I'll go through these. Sometimes asking for a show of hands is great. Sometimes it's not. Thoughtfully involve your audience, all right? Don't just assume, I'll just ask a question, have them show their hands, and we'll be okay. No, thoughtfully do it. He talks about how asking for a show of hands is effective and how it can be used, and it's a great way to do it. I'll have a lot of students who will begin speeches with, okay, by show of hands, how many of you in here are going to have student loans to pay off when you're done with school? Oh, all but one of us, Or, hey, by show of hands, how many of you in here know how to speak Latin? Nobody. Okay, something like that. And people raising their hands, and They look around. It's a really good way to get the audience involved if it's appropriate, if it's relevant. Okay. Ask trivia. He talks about using trivia. This is a really cool one too. I'll have students who sometimes they'll put something up on a PowerPoint slide and go, "Does anybody know what year this picture was taken?" Or they'll play a sound clip and they'll go, "Does anybody know who wrote this song, not who recorded it?" Or something like that. And it's always a really interesting way to do that. Give them a problem to solve. This is a really cool way. He describes this in the reading. Make sure they can solve it in 30 to 60 seconds, or think about it for 30 to 60 seconds. It's not like, okay, you have 5 minutes, unless you're doing like an all-day thing, which is fine. And then my words here are stay in control. When you get the audience involved, you always risk losing control. Okay? So you have to be very specific. You have to be very thoughtful about involving the audience, okay? If I'm going to ask questions, I need to have written out that question, thought it through, make sure my wording is specific. He talks a little bit about this in the reading. Don't just say, "Anybody have any questions?" No, say, "Hey, does anybody is there a point you would like me to clarify?" Is his advice for one point, which is really great. But be very careful about how you do this. Do not just blindly start involving your audience, okay? And definitely don't hand over the microphone. Okay? If they're asking questions and they have their own microphone, that's one thing, but you're the one in control. Okay? You're the one in control. Which brings us to you are judge and jury. Okay? You're the one in control, and now you should have zero problems with this in our class. First of all, if you're recording this with your audience, it's your audience. They shouldn't interrupt or do anything. We're not doing question and answer sessions. That's for an advanced class. So you are judge and jury. This is for other situations. Never be afraid to enforce rules you know the room wants you to follow. Okay? I think that is really great advice. He gives some good examples in the reading. But also, again, folks, he talks about silencing someone whose cell phone goes off on the front row or whatever. That's not an always thing. Right? If you're in that business meeting with your bosses and your boss's bosses and one of their cell phone goes off and they pick it up, I would highly suggest not calling them out on that. Okay? That's probably not the moment. It's not the moment to be like, "Excuse me, I'm presenting, to your boss's boss." Because in that moment, not only do you look bad, but your boss looks bad because, they vouched for you probably. So, again, at the right moment, at the right time. And then he says, be polite and be direct, and that's true. You don't want to be a jerk, because if you're a jerk running someone, if you're a jerk enforcing the rules, you become the jerk enforcing the rules, not the person who's in it for the greater good. Okay? You shouldn't have to do any of this in this class. He just incorporates it, and it's decent advice for some presentations. I find most of the time it's not an issue. Okay? And then lastly, okay, always end early. Now, what he's saying is never plan on using all the time given. So if you've got a speech that is, 4 to 6 minutes long, don't plan on going 5 minutes and 57 seconds. Try to keep it to 4.5 minutes or 5 minutes, so that, first of all, if you're in the middle of it, you've got wiggle room to elaborate. If all of a sudden in the middle of your speech you have this awesome thought, you've got the time to say it. Okay? You can actually go with that flow rather than having that awesome thought and being like, got to shut that thought down and keep with what I've got. Okay? Never plan on using all the time given. Okay? Plan and practice to end early, but do not end too early. Okay? First of all, you have a time limit, and if you don't meet the time limit on your speech, you're going to lose points. But outside of this class, if your bosses have set aside an hour to do a business presentation or a business meeting and talk about it, and you're done in 3 minutes, and you're like, "I ended early." Yeah. It's going to make you look like you're underprepared, right? So you end reasonably early, okay? You do your presentation, you answer the questions, you have thorough discussion. But if you're done 10 minutes early, when they set aside 90 minutes, that's reasonable. And they're going to be like, "You said what you needed to say, you didn't go on, and it's awesome." Okay? So, folks, this is everything I have to say about getting and keeping attention. I'll see you in the board.